You are attending another FMRI webinar, seminar, but this time we have the privilege to have Miss Caitlin Hughes with us. I would like to thank the WTS that they put this seminar together. It's one of the two that we have in April that Zoitsa is going to tell you more later on. So our guest today is Ms. Caitlin Hughes, that has served as a director of the Office of Freight Management and Operations for the Federal Highway Administration since 2013, and overseen a program in policy, legislations, and regulations related to the highway and multimodal freight, as well as freight, I need to read it, it's a long, as Federal Highway Administration for several multimodal funding programs. Her program responsibilities include management of highway freight networks, truck parking solutions, commercial motor vehicle size and weight, regulatory compliance, freight research, data and tools, national and state freight planning and training, outreach and technical assistance on planning, freight advisory committees and performance measurements. Ms. Hughes leads the implementation of the formula-based National Highway Freight Program, a $6.3 billion federal aid appointment program, and Federal Highway Administration of the INFRA, RAISE, MEGA, and Rural Project Grant programs. From 1997 to 2001, Ms. Hughes served in the Office of the Secretary of the United States Department of Transportation as staff to Deputy Secretary and in the Office of Policy. Previously, she was the Assistant Secretary for Policy and Freight at the Maryland DOT 2007-2013 and Federal Legislative Programs Coordinator for the North Carolina DOT 2001-2007. From 1990 to 2007, Ms. Hughes worked on Capitol Hill, first as a staff of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, and later with the private sector, lobbying Congress on appointment matters, on appropriation matters, I'm sorry. Caitlin holds a BA from the University of Maryland and a Master of Public Administration degree from the George Washington University. As a former Presidential Management Fellow, Caitlin served as Executive Director of the U2K Outreach Program from the United States Department of Transportation from 1998 to 2000. Caitlin, thank you that you are here. And also, I will not forget, Ms. Hughes, can I say that, is our advisory board member from the Freight Center that we have at the FAU, the Freight Mobility Research Institute. Thank you.
Very much for inviting me. Before I jump headfirst into this dry government-approved slide deck, I'd like to talk a little bit about why we're here today. I'm here doing transportation policy, programming, and research because I enjoy fixing things. And I'm here because when I was a grad student, commuting between my job and my university in downtown DC and my home in the Maryland suburbs, I found myself stuck in traffic quite often. Listening to news stories on the radio about this amazing new toll road they call the Greenway. It was going to make life for people on the Virginia side of DC so much better, offering a speedy trip to Dulles Airport. It sounded wonderful. It was a public-private partnership. It would eliminate congestion. It would pay for itself. It had the word green in it. So at least these are the things that I can recall from my commute. It ended up being a little bit of a bumpy project, as many innovations can be, but I did take that route to get here today, to the airport, to fly to Florida to talk to you. So in addition to efficiency and some impressive safety statistics, the Greenway also touts its wetlands preservation and is home to some recently hatched bald eagles. And now, approximately a quarter century later, after the opening of the Dulles Toll Road, the same corridor recently debuted a new rail transit line, which was funded in part from the proceeds from the toll road. And this connects the airport to downtown Washington, making it a multimodal corridor with options for travelers as well as the local workforce. These are the kind of solutions that make me happy to be working in transportation field, and I hope you'll be able to be part of some of these as well. So here you are today studying at FAU, presumably for many of the same reasons. Maybe you've seen something you'd like to fix or build or run. Maybe you'd like to change the relationship between people and transportation so it'll be safer, cleaner, more equitable, or more long-lasting. Maybe you have a solution for the supply chain delays that can be global but can have a very local impact on yourself and your friends. Whatever your reasons for being here today, I hope these updates on our federal freight transportation programs at the Federal Highway Administration give you a window into some of the things we're doing at the Department of Transportation in partnership with the public and private sectors, and in service to the human and natural environment, which are affected by our freight transportation infrastructure and operations. I hope this spurs some questions and some new ideas. And I encourage you to reach out to me and my DOT colleagues as you enter the transportation and engineering work world. We're happy to have your energy and your vision for a better future. With that intro, I'm now going to turn to the key topics on this agenda. We have a disclaimer here. These are views and opinions expressed are mine and not necessarily reflecting those of the Federal Highway Administration or the U.S. Department of Transportation. Today's presentation will cover state freight plans and state freight advisory committees, a bit on truck parking, which is a very critical issue facing truck transportation today, and then quite a bit more on freight research and data initiatives, which I hope will be useful to you. Would be useful if here we go. Thank you. So this is a critical statistic. This is why I think it's so important that we all focus on how to fix the problems. You can see here the projections for growth in U.S. freight by 2050 are quite significant in the area of the weight of freight moved, as well as the value and the international value of freight. Its weight is going to translate to number of trucks in many cases, but of course also it's a multimodal statistic. So that's also going to look at barge and ship and rail traffic, but the latter two bars being related to the economy, obviously important that we solve for the issues of the day. You can see the predominance that trucking has in our freight transportation system. As Dr. Kaiser mentioned earlier, I'm with the Federal Highway Administration, so our work in my office is predominantly focused on the truck traffic. First, I'd like to talk briefly about state freight plans and state freight advisory committees. The Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, which is an authorizing law that governs what transportation programs are desired by Congress and funded, set forth requirements for the development of state freight plans by each state and the District of Columbia, which once those plans were completed would enable those entities to receive federal formula funds for freight. That was the first time there had been a state freight plan requirement, and all of the states and the District of Columbia produced state freight plans. They were required to be updated every 5 years, and a construct called the State Freight Advisory Committees was described and encouraged, although not required. Now, under the new authorizing law, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that is also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was passed in 2021, there are new elements that have been added to the existing law to broaden the scope of state freight plans and are still a condition of the funding. The update cycle is now 4 years. The U.S. Department of Transportation released guidance helping states understand the new requirements and some of the recommendations that the federal government has for implementing these. Approximately half of the state freight plans have been updated and approved in compliance with these new requirements, and you can find these on our website. There's a screenshot of it. The Freight Professional Capacity Building program has a web page with an area that you can click to look at each of the individual plans. The BIL, as it's known to us at DOT, also updated the list of representatives that should be included in the membership of a state freight advisory committee and added certain qualifications. We really like the state freight advisory committees Only about 36 states have had them in the past. They usually use them to help develop their state freight plans. We like them because it's a great way for a state to communicate with and have a dialogue with the public and private sector stakeholders that would be affected by the transportation infrastructure investment in their state. They can also tackle operations issues and find out about emerging challenges in the freight world and try to plan for those. So we encourage states to continue to develop those. The state freight plan requirements I mentioned were expanded under the BIL, and here are the new additional requirements. You can see here, the first one is about truck parking, an assessment of commercial motor vehicle parking facilities. The second, very familiar to many of us now, the recent supply chain cargo flows are quite critical to understand and plan for. The reason this is here, I think, is because historically freight has been private sector dominated. States have not managed the operations of freight. They don't tell the trucks where to go. Freight flows to where it is most cost effective and most efficient. So in this requirement, this is potentially a way to get the states to think about their relationship to the supply chain and how the investments they make in the state can help or hinder that. Similarly, there's a component here to address commercial ports. On number 13, you see a discussion of any multi-state freight compact. There is now beginning to be more multi-state freight corridor planning, which is exciting, hopefully supporting that supply chain throughput. Number 14, Congress requested that states look at the impacts of e-commerce on freight infrastructure. That obviously took a great leap forward under the pandemic, and we saw a huge uptick in intermodal truck movements during the pandemic. Considerations of military freight, and then number 16, which is really 4 discrete elements, strategies and goals to decrease the severity of impacts of extreme weather and natural disasters on freight mobility, the impacts of freight movement on local air pollution, on flooding and stormwater runoff, and on wildlife habitat loss. Now, what we're finding so far in the development of these plans is that some states do not have the sort of analysis and data that would lend themselves easily to answer these. For example, 16D, the freight movement on wildlife habitat loss, that's a data gap. Some states had been looking at it, others had not done so at all, except perhaps as part of the NEPA process for a major project. So we're in a learning curve here and looking for ways to help the states improve their understanding of what's happening in their states for future state freight plan updates. Each of those sub-bullets, as I said, needs to be addressed. And here's some ideas that were put forward by the Office of the Secretary, things that the Office of the Secretary is looking for in approving the plans and how states could go a little bit farther or do things in a more comprehensive way. So we're happy to be receiving these plans and figuring out where the states are looking to head. Now, turning to truck parking, many of you will probably have seen trucks parked along the side of the road. There are many trucks out there that do not have a readily available safe place to park. That affects a number of different trucking activities, from long haul drivers who need the overnight parking to trucks that are waiting for a port to open up its gates. A 30-minute break is also a federally mandated requirement, and safe parking is needed for that. There may be emergencies or simply a need for parking during time off. So we know from our activities of the Department of Transportation that this is a critical and growing need. In fact, the pace of the development of truck parking facilities and spaces is outpaced by the growth in trucking freight. So it continues to be important. It continues to be something of great need by the truckers. And so we at the Department of Transportation are working with the public and private sector to encourage investment and planning in this area. I have in this slide deck many slides related to truck parking. but I'm not going to go through all of them in depth. If you are interested, I'd be happy to share the slide deck with you. We also have this online in the Federal Highway Administration's section on the National Coalition on Truck Parking. That is a very large voluntary group of folks that are interested in truck parking and have shared ideas for improving the capacity needs nationwide. As part of our activities, we also work with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration because it is their regulatory requirements that set the hours of service under which truck drivers must operate, and that dictates the time they need to rest. So we jointly care about this, and we have also expanded that to include the Maritime Administration because ports generate a lot of truck freight, and those trucks do need the truck drivers do need to rest. And the Federal Railroad Administration has also been involved. So we have a multimodal approach to solving this, and we work across the country with various stakeholders from the states to law enforcement to the trucking community, both the independent owner operators as well as the American Trucking Association and the National Association of Truck Stop Owners and Operators. One of the things we've done is run 2 surveys. These were congressionally required. We expanded the scope beyond just what states knew about their truck parking to find out what drivers felt, and then more recently what the ports were doing about it. So we have results from those surveys online. That's how we know that we have only a 6% and 11% increase in the public and private parking spaces respectively, but we had more like a 15% increase in that same time frame in numbers of trucks moving. So again, this is an area that we need to focus on. It's in places you might expect, urban areas, especially where there is not a lot of open land to develop new truck parking. And that leads to what we call unofficial parking, but really is the dangerous parking, the side of the road, that on ramps, et cetera, neighborhoods, near schools. So we want to make sure that there are sufficient investments made to tackle this, and done so in a combination of public and private investment. So with that, I'm going to turn from truck parking to some of the strategies. This again is a repeat of the statutory requirement for states to look more deeply at the truck parking. You can see that the statute dictates things like the volume of commercial motor vehicle traffic and whether there's any areas in the state with a shortage. Less sophisticated analyses early on were more aggregate numbers. So a state might say, we have this many truck parking spaces. However, we now know that those spaces are not necessarily where the need is. So this kind of analysis will really help drill down as to where the capacity expansion is needed. And in order to advance that investment, we've done an analysis of all of our formula-funded programs, which are funds that go to the state departments of transportation, as well as our discretionary programs, which have competitive grants going to mostly public sector applicants. And we found that we have many, many programs with eligibility for truck parking. So the idea that there isn't money out there is not necessarily true. However, it is very highly competitive against other trucking and highways and freight and non-freight needs. But you can see here a list of the grant programs, for example. And all of this is, again, on our website. We're hoping that our partners have found this useful to help identify funds. We also developed a truck parking handbook to help metropolitan planning organizations and local governments identify the issues associated with truck parking in their communities and some of the potential solutions. That was launched last year in the fall. It's up on our web page. It also talks about things like EV charging, human trafficking, some of the other considerations that come into play when you're looking at developing a truck parking facility. But the goal here is to demystify the idea of expanding truck parking, reduce the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard objections that you often see at the local level, and hopefully, again, expand more truck parking nationwide. So these are a few slides summarizing the elements that are in that truck parking design handbook and development handbook. And we know that they're already being put to use, that several local and state entities have told us they're using this handbook to expand their thought and hopefully investment. So you can see there are a lot of design parameters that are important when you're designing an appropriately framed truck parking facility. So let's move now to the last section of the presentation here. And what I'd like to do is talk about the freight data, both what the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law requested and the kinds of research and data initiatives that we have underway in the department to assist. We did an analysis of the new law, and as you can see on the far right, identified some data gaps. One of those data gaps is a lack of data on e-commerce impacts on demand and delivery. These would be good areas for you to look into if you're thinking of a research project, or you want to partner with others looking at ways perhaps to propose National Highway Cooperative Research Program funding for something like this, or an FMRI investment. But hydrology impacts of freight infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, wildlife data, natural disaster effects on freight, and freight impact on local roads, all data gaps that could bear, I can go back to that slide, I saw someone taking pictures, but all data gaps that bear further research. And if you have creative ideas for how to collect that data, we are all ears. We do use freight analytics. The tools and data you see on the left-hand side are sort of long-term initiatives that we've had, even truck parking, we've been doing this now for about 8 or 10 years. Maybe the only new one there is the Freight Mobility Trends tool, which is about 2 years old and now has emissions data in it, as well as cost of delay and the delay. You can geofence and look at different freight networks. It's a very cool tool, so I draw your attention to that. We hope states are using that to look at and compare potential investments and pick the ones with the highest and best utility for the system. And then we have new research on the side here. I'll go into bias and truck size and weight in a moment. We also have a national behavior-based freight model and a couple other elements that are feeding into the supply chain analysis. Just for context, we do a conditions and performance report periodically. This is another statutorily required analysis. It looks at such things as mobility trends, methods to improve reliability and bottlenecks, ties into the performance-based planning process. We do require states to submit truck freight performance, truck freight delay numbers so that we can do a bigger picture analysis of what's happening nationwide. It's a little bit too big picture. The aggregate is really not, so it's not as informative as looking at what's happening at the state and sub-state levels, but the data is quite interesting. So this conditions and performance report, which is a highways and transit report, has a freight component to it, and we developed that out of my office. You can see the goal areas there. The most recently released one still had some relatively emerging areas of understanding of freight, but the next one will have some good detail on the corridors of urban and rural freight corridors. So look for that to come out soon. You can see here's an example, pavement condition index that's offered up. We look at peak period congestion on the National Highway Freight Network. This is an evolving network. As new interstates are added, that becomes part of the National Highway Freight Network. But it was a network basically derived from data on essentially average annual daily truck traffic. So it's a data-driven network, but it's driven as of that period of time that we have the data. So, you know, I think going forward, we'll probably want to get more sophisticated ways of looking at freight, and then maybe not putting so much value on where freight has been, but where freight needs to go, because this is really a historical look at where freight went. It might have been that way because there was a major construction project on a more ideal freight route. And so at the time that the data was collected, it's actually tracking a diversionary route. So again, I just urge you to take freight networks that are data-driven with a grain of salt based on how old the data is and what do you think were the conditions at the time. Nevertheless, they are still tied to eligibilities for certain funding. So they are important to our partners in the states. Freight operations, as I said earlier, the federal government does not operate freight. We don't have a fleet of trucks that's moving goods on our behalf, unless you count the military. But we are keenly interested in helping the private sector improve in that area. So we do, if you're not familiar with it by now, you should be. The Freight Analysis Framework is a multimodal set of data and projections offering a lot of different analyses. We update this every 5 years. It can help, for example, understand current and projected future freight movement and better visualize freight flows and other freight data. We made some improvements to FAF recently to help disaggregate it, make it more useful for local and state governments, not just the very long origin destination aspects of it. But you can see here FAF projected growth for freight still going up. It's good for the economy, bad for congestion. Here we are. These are some of the products: the origin destination flows, highway network flows, and then various special products. We have come up with a visualization tool that we're developing so that people who are not as sophisticated users of data and modeling can get in there and play with it and look at different networks. And I think it's quite exciting. I think that's groundbreaking because there will be communities that are interested in freight projects that don't have a full-time freight data analyst on staff. So that will be released later this year. Here's a preview of what the special visualization dashboard will look like. This is one set of the information you can get. There will be a lot of different ways to cut the data and help people better understand what's going on. So let's see. Next, again, our goal is to constantly improve on the information we have available or get new information, and we will continue to look at more ways to provide access to freight information for different communities, different user groups. Here are links that we have to FAF products. We are also doing a visualization tool for the Vehicle Inventory and Use Survey. This survey was last conducted in 2002, and everyone said we need new data. So it was many years in the reconstitution of it, and it was administered in 2021. That data has been packaged and will be released this year. And as part of that, we will update a visualization tool. We built the visualization tool, which right now just shows you the old data. It's in clearance. We'll publicize it when it's launched. And then as soon as the VIAS 2021 data is available, we'll plug that into the visualization tool. Here's a sample of what that future tool will look like if you want to get into it. It shows the different commodities. There's the 92, 97, and 2002 data. Really looking forward to getting the new data in there and some new aspects. For example, the fuel type. That really wasn't a question back in 1992, but we'll be able to look at the growth in alt fuel trucks, for example. Freight fluidity. This is a very interesting way to look at the movement of goods. I will tell you that I think that the freight fluidity efforts may be moving to the Office of the Secretary. Federal Highways has this freight office, which I direct, but it is only one section of the Department of Transportation that looks at freight. And now we have a brand new Office of Multimodal Freight that's being stood up. So we'll be looking at which aspects of research to move into that. And because freight fluidity has multimodal linkages and it relates to the flow initiative that the Office of the Secretary had conducted during the supply chain crisis a couple years ago, I think that you will see freight fluidity probably become part of the focus of the Office of the Secretary. Stuff we do in my office, and we've looked at border wait times. We gave grants to states to pick whatever technology they wanted and figure out how that information on border wait time could be useful. These are the sort of special projects we like to launch. we've done some work on freight traveler information systems, looking at we developed an algorithm, put it up open source on our webpage for anyone to use to help improve the scheduling of trucks, calling it freight intensive facilities, not just ports, but that's a good one. Hospitals have a lot of freight, surprisingly. Even cruise ships, you know, you got to bring the food in, you got to carry the waste out. So there's a lot of applications. I'm currently toying with the idea of how do we get this into the hands of grain operators, granary operators in the rural areas, because I understand there are long queues of farmers waiting to drop off their loads on small 2-lane roads. It creates a safety hazard and it's inefficient for farmers who want to get back to work. They're just waiting to dump their goods. So if we could get this sort of scheduling system easily into the hands of the folks who operate the grain elevators, I think we could have a safety solution as well as an efficiency solution. So again, any kind of ideas you have where you can take existing tools and morph them for other purposes, we would love to hear about it. Freight transportation optimization tool. I'm actually not going to go in depth on too many of these because I'm afraid of running out of time, and I would love to hear your questions. But you can see some other areas that we're looking at here, looking at freight scenario questions. Tools and training. Again, I mentioned our new freight professional capacity building program website. I would urge you to go take a look at this. There's a QR code up there if you want to scan it. This is where we're now moving a lot of our new tools and information. So if you're working in the freight transportation space and you want to know what's the latest, go to this website. I also think this one may be moving from Federal Highway Gov to Secretary ultimately, because they will, there's a lot of multimodal application for this. So this is going to get even better. This was just launched last fall, and we would love your feedback on it. But there on the left are some of the topics of interest that are available to you on that website. A little bit more here. Still same website. There's a data library, and you can see a summary of some of the transportation freight data that is available to you there. I mentioned earlier the National Highway Freight Network. We have a visualization tool for that as well. So if you're trying to understand what does the NHFN look like, there is a better way to get into it now than simply the tables of the endpoints of the segments. So again, I think thankfully computers have evolved to the point that we're now able to use them to make sense of this for people who like pictures, which is, I'm one of those people. So excited about all those tools. Now, also, I will just say we have had a focus on truck size and weight research. Congress has asked us periodically to look at the impacts of heavier and longer trucks on our nation's infrastructure system. It's a very touchy subject. Safety advocates are not happy with this. The railroads see it as business competitive. Even the trucking industry is split. You have independent owner operators who have their truck unhappy with the idea that a new truck configuration might become acceptable and allowed. Different operational design domains for trucks also play into this. But nevertheless, we do periodically look at that question, but in the interim, we have a lot of unanswered questions. So here's some of the research that's being conducted across the Department of Transportation in the area of truck size and weight, not to answer another big question yet of whether to have bigger or longer trucks, but just to clear up some questions that there's just a lot that isn't known. So the use of weigh in motion technology, the new applications for the freight analysis framework, the use of the new bias data that, you know, now that it's the old stuff was more than 20 years old, really looking to get that new data into our analyses. There's such things as a large truck crash causation study underway at our counterpart agency, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. My staff is assisting in that study. So that'll give us more safety data, which we lacked the last time we did a comprehensive truck size and weight limits study. We need more information on bridge deck deterioration. There was no commonly accepted model for bridge deck deterioration. And there still is not. But that's part of a long-term pavement research program, and there's a long-term bridge research program. So these
things take a long time to produce results. But in the meantime, we've created an internal working group to share information on emerging truck size and weight research and develop more research initiatives where we see the need and hopefully share that information. So here are a few more areas that we're looking at. Bridge strikes, for example, that's a cross-cutting one. Was it a safety issue? Was it an infrastructure issue? Was it a freight issue? It was all of those. Nobody was doing anything specific on it. We all got together and decided we needed to because we can't keep having trucks hit bridges. So happy to say there's several different projects in that area now underway. We have law enforcement data, which we collect from the states annually. And we've started to post that. If you want to look at which states are more aggressive in pulling over heavy trucks, it's really an interesting, it's a small data set, but it's interesting, I think, to compare. There is no federal standard for how many trucks you should pull over per capita or per vehicle mile traveled. You know, it's a fun one, I think, to dive into and do some analytics on. Here's some WIM motion data. Got the QR codes there. We have recently improved the mapping of our national network. It was a pretty inaccurate map for a while, so now it's good. We've gotten the states to validate the segments again, and that's available online. And then we were active in funding and launching a new web page hosted by the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance to share emergency declarations by states during a time of emergency so that truck drivers who are seeking permits would know where to go, what the different allowances are in each state, and plan their multi-state routes accordingly so they can get to the site of an emergency. So that launched in 2022. And though I don't hope for emergencies, I am hopeful that when there are emergencies, people will be using that site. There's a pretty impressive picture, but I already talked about the need to do bridge strike research and hopefully develop some mitigation strategies. So with that, that concludes my formal presentation. I did want to tell you that we are in a massive hiring mode. We have a lot of jobs at the federal government. The Department of Transportation has several notices on USA Jobs, advertising careers in planning, engineering, finance, a whole range of transportation-related activities. We had a wave of retirements and some natural shifting after the pandemic, but we are really looking for fresh faces to come into the federal government. So if you're interested in a career in the federal government, I highly recommend it. I have bounced back and forth, private sector, and as you heard from my resume, state DOTs and back to the feds, and I highly recommend the federal government. It's a great place to work and to innovate, to help launch some of these new initiatives. So there's that, and then we often tend to hire people too from the state departments of transportation. So they are hiring now because some of their people have come to the federal government. So if you're headed toward graduation, you're looking for a job, public sector is a really good place to be. With that, I want to thank you for your time today and open it up for any questions.
For the students that are interested to get a job in federal government, what is the right process?
Okay, thank you. So the question is, what's the right process to apply for a job in the federal government? Typically, it has been to go through the USA Jobs website. That's where the jobs are posted. However, since the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was passed, the federal government decided to implement some more creative, faster ways of hiring. So we have a tool called Direct Hire, which is you can send your resume and a cover letter, hopefully, to anybody and let them know you're interested in working for them. And then if they have a job, they can use the Direct Hire authority to interview you and decide whether to offer you a position. It's a lot less cumbersome. You don't have to wait for a whole collection of competitors to be selected. And then for those interviews to go through many people, it's what it says, it's direct hire. So, you know, if there's an office you've had your eye on, I would urge you to reach out to them directly. They may not be using direct hire, but they do have that option, and it works for most job series. So it's a little bit like how I got into USDOT. I was doing a research paper, and someone at the Department of Transportation took a nice hour and a half of their time at the end of a Friday, and I was so impressed that I thought, I want to go work for this office. I want to, you know, what can I do to get in here? So I kept my eye on it and ultimately got in through the Presidential Management Fellowship Program. But direct hire is another great way to get your foot in the door. So that's my recommendation. And you can do both, you know, apply USA Jobs and direct hire. Yes, sir.
So what is a common strategy that is used besides trying to increase the capacity of?
Well, there have been some projects funded with federal funds and matched by non-federal funds to develop better truck parking information systems. You may have seen, you're in Florida, may have seen the TPAS system. There's the variable message signs, or there's some sort of counter that says, you know, up ahead, truck parking, but invariably it'll say 0 if the space is available. That's the problem, because there just isn't enough capacity. So we can build all the apps for locating truck parking or truck parking information systems that we want, and there's a lot of federal funding eligibility, but if there's no capacity, it's not very helpful to the driver who is needing to park within the next 30 minutes. So again, our emphasis now really is on parking expansion. There are some creative ways to do it. You know, we urge working with the private sector because we don't want to compete with them, but we do want the facilities to be useful. It doesn't help if you build the truck parking facility 5 miles from the interstate. No truck driver is going to want to go more than a mile away. They would like to be right there. But right now, you can't build truck parking with commercial services on the interstate right of way because there's an ancient prohibition on commercialization in the interstate right of way. So there's some congressionally legislated bottlenecks to efficiency. But, you know, I think that hopefully in the future, there will be creative ways to tackle the need. And it could be reuse of big box retail facilities if they're positioned in the right place and have those big parking lots. It could be, at one point when I was at the state of Maryland, we were looking at whether the University of Maryland, Baltimore County could use some of its parking for weather emergencies because they're right near Interstate 95. Could trucks be routed to their parking lot just for, you know, severe snowstorms? So that it depends. I think that's why facilitated truck parking discussions with the trucking community and the state and locals are really great because they can understand what are the needs in our state. What do we have to plan for most? Is it surges, or do we have a port and all of a sudden we have massive congestion and truck drivers run out of operating time and they have to park because of the variability in port surges? Or is it a mountain pass in Montana that you know, is constantly in whiteout conditions, so we need some safe pullover spots? So again, they're actually very local challenges, but they have nationwide implications for this long haul route.
How does the future autonomous how does the FSP sees that
Yeah, well, that's a good question. What does the future look like with autonomous trucks on these other trucking issues? And I remember about 5 years ago, I had come back from an autonomous vehicle conference, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, wait, maybe we're spending too much time worrying about truck parking. If there's no drivers in the truck, why do we need to build all this parking? We'll have paved everything for no good reason. Is that coming in 5 years? Is it coming in 10? But the more I got involved in our multimodal autonomous vehicle discussions and watched the trends out there in the industry, it became apparent to me that we were still going to need parking. We were going to need parking, if not for driver needs, for rest, then parking for transloading. Because one of the ideas was you have autonomous vehicles on a sort of shuttle, a fixed route, point to point on an interstate, but then it stops and then the goods are transloaded to something with a driver for local deliveries. So you're going to need a parking spot for transloading, or swapping out the cab or something. You might need it for recharging. What if those trucks become electric trucks? You see the move in California to low emission trucks or zero emission trucks. You're going to need a place to put that truck. Now, the operational needs of a charging truck are very different from a sleeping driver. Different time frames, different support facilities. You need restrooms, hopefully showers, pet relief areas. Drivers have dogs, and even exercise. One truck driver we know very well used to throw his bike in his cab and try to get a little exercise when he was on his break. So, you don't need that with an autonomous truck, but if the autonomous truck is recharging, it's going to need, to have truck stop electrification to enable that capability of recharging. So there are a lot of activities right now in the recharging world because of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which created both discretionary and formula funding for electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Development of corridors, charging corridors. Again, you still got the interstate prohibition on commercialization, so hard to get your fees levied for recharging if you're talking about a facility on the interstate. But one thing that I'm hoping that we'll do this year is begin a dialogue on what are the challenges of charging and driver needed parking in the same space. How can we design it? How can we plan for it? What's the success going to look like there? But to the bigger picture question, I don't know when we'll see the dramatic shift to autonomous trucks and what else that might drive in terms of needs. But to the very narrow question about parking, those are the sort of things we've been thinking.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it, but the other one is that so that involves flight delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Drones have limited ability to have maybe 1 hour or 2 hour from place to another. And need to land it, charge it, drone for it.
Yeah, I've seen videos with mobile launch spaces. You have a truck where you launch the drones from. So you move it to an area, send them out from there, and they would come back. Haven't done a lot of that in my office at the moment. Some of this is we wait to see what the research is doing, what the private sector interest is, and then what is the federal nexus? Is there something that we have that prevents that from succeeding? Is there something that we could do that would help the nation take up these new technologies? Those are the questions I ask for. What do I need to fix? What do my staff need to fix? I have really brilliant staff, have had, in the 10 years I've been there, I've had a lot of brilliant staff, and they have come up with these ideas, the visualization tools, the freight mobility trends tool, the freight fluidity work. These are all things that the staff have generated that have, I think, really advanced transportation solutions. So we'll see what else autonomous trucks may have for us in terms of challenges and opportunities. Any other questions?
Yeah.
There's some in the chat. I haven't looked at it.
Any other questions?
If anyone have any question in the WebEx, you can ask in the chat box. No, there is no question. No question there.
Any question from here? Okay, so since we mentioned all these views, but how can the system is for that? How would you break it starting? What's in which step are we ready? Well, is like very start or B steps collecting data, or would you say like overall, how prepared the system enough? We have sort of
Yeah, I would say it's not a linear process, right? You could try to map it. Here's where we're starting, here's where we're going to end up. But I think what we've seen is it's gone up and down in terms of surging interest. You see the private sector charge ahead, and then there's some technological or safety setback, right? And then they drop back down, go back to the drawing board, work some things out, come back roaring again. And meanwhile, we do have groups at the Department of Transportation that are multimodal with NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and some of the other modes, as we call them, and they're looking at what should we be doing? Where are our opportunities and our challenges? But you know, I don't know that it's possible right now to fix a timeline on success. The nice thing about Vias is that we added in a whole bunch of technology-based questions so that we can track what is the growth in the market of users. How many more autonomous vehicles, level 3 or, you know, more do we have than we had last time we administered this survey? So that's exciting because now we can see where it's headed. Sometimes it's a bit of a mystery. I mean, when we did the comprehensive truck size and weight limit study, we weren't actually apprised of the fact that there were twin 33 trucks on certain routes in the country, including here in Florida on one route. And that's because certain states had exemptions and could accommodate longer trucks within their exemptions. So business being what it is, it saw the opportunity and tried them out. But that they didn't need federal permission because it was already there in the length allowances for those states. So similarly, I think where there are not federal permissions needed, there will be growth. You know, you saw so there was a beer truck run many years ago, right, in Colorado, and with an autonomous truck. And so, you know, we are trying to track these and understand what's happening with them. But I don't I don't run that. That's run in another part of the operations office and the research office. So I'm not particularly keen on. I don't particularly know the trajectory for this. I've just seen it go up and down. And some companies go out of business, and then new ones start up. So it's the ancient beta versus VHS tape. But you know, that's probably what would be the equivalent here. I don't know. I'm not even going to try. I'm just dating myself horribly. So let's just say that we'll have to wait and see.
I think we have a question in the chat box. Any plans to make the refresh of FAF data faster?
Yeah, not at this time. It's still on that same update cycle. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics is now taking over the regular production of that data. I will carry a request back to them, which I think is inherent in your question, that you would like to see it sooner. If you could let us know what you think a more useful refresh cycle would be, please throw that in the chat. Is it every 3 years, every 2 years? Obviously, there's a huge cost associated with refreshing the FAF data. So, you know, trying to understand what's helpful, necessary based on our various planning requirements, and feasible. You know, as it is, we still have some state freight plans that they're trying to build off of much older data, even 10-year-old data. We'd rather not see that. We'd rather see our partners have newer data for better, more robust analysis. So please let us know. Carlos, thank you. Here's another chat question. One of the issues with opening public parking spaces to truckers is the accumulation of DEF boxes, tires, and liquid, human and vehicle waste left behind. Any thoughts on how to address this issue to make truck parking a more attractive land use option for owners and neighbors? I hope that the truck parking development handbook helps get at some of these issues, but I think that that's an operational question for the owner of the facility. I mean, if it's, when you say public parking spaces, there are a lot of different ways you can have a parking space. You can build extra spaces in alongside the highway, the interstate highway. Those don't have any services, and of course may end up then with some waste and trash, hopefully not. But and then there's others that are very comprehensive because maybe they were built alongside a private sector truck stop that already had a lot of those capabilities to manage those. That is a good question. I think it's one that would make a good research topic.
I think, have any question? Set it out, set it for yourself on the room.
No,
Okay?
no question.
We are going to conclude
Yeah.
this presentation here. So it's a
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. So we have an upcoming webinar on April 14th, which will be presented by Mr. Scott, and he will be presenting about truck parking challenges, solutions, and the wide-ranging impacts, which will be hosted by FMRI and co-hosted by IT. I hope you all will join us. Thank you so much.
you have any-
Yes. So